Hi, my name is Cooper Barth, and this is my end of quarter update for the On the Go Helper Inconveniences project. So, the research that I did this quarter examined the on the go physical crowdsourcing space. So, in typical directed crowdsourcing systems such as Uber and Postmates, helpers are incentivized to be inconvenienced. They're paid money to go out of their way in order to perform tasks. But in on the go systems, helpers' existing paths and routines are leveraged in order to make tasks more convenient and more low effort. This way, helpers may not need to be directly incentivized in order to perform tasks, and as such, not need to be directly inconvenienced. This project examines this on the go system in the context of a food delivery system, such as Postmates. So, in order for an on the go delivery system to be successful, helpers need to not be significantly inconvenienced by their tasks once those tasks are accepted. Further inconvenience during the delivery process causes disincentivization from participating in this sort of system. One of the most vital problems that occurs within the last mile of delivery is poor meeting point placement. If a meeting point is placed in a location that would cause the helper to take a significant amount of time to make a delivery, then they'll feel disincentivized from participating more in the system. So current methods of meeting point selection are inefficient for on-the-go systems. The naive solution would be to let the helper manually select the meeting point upon accepting the order. Although this would definitely, obviously, minimize the distance that the helper would need to deviate from their path, it would often cause them further inconvenience because the requester might need to take a long time in order to reach a meeting point that was on the helper's path, which would make the helper have to wait. Another solution would be to automatically generate a meeting point at a minimum distance between the requester and the helper's path, such that both users would need to travel a minimum distance in order to reach the meeting point. There are, however, several problems with this solution. Firstly, in on the go systems, we can't always equate straight line distance to time spent making a delivery. There are various times, especially when buildings are involved, where a point that would be more convenient for a helper to reach is slightly farther from their direct path, especially a straight line path. And the system will get that wrong a lot of the time and cause the helper to have to deviate to a meeting point that would be less convenient than another potential point. Secondly, a system like this doesn't take requesters and helpers' activities into account. In directed systems such as Uber Express Pool, it's expected that the requester will always be available to move to the meeting point when they're needed to, which isn't the case in on-the-go systems. If the meeting point is placed and the requester has to go elsewhere for a meeting or a class, or if they're already in motion, then their daily activities are going to be significantly disrupted in order to have to stay at that location and make the delivery, or they'll miss the delivery, which will further inconvenience the helper. So in order to solve this problem, we first have to consider how to minimize both the time it takes for the helper to deviate to the meeting point and the time that it takes for the helper and requester to successfully meet at that point in any possible scenario. As such, we need to make sure that both the helpers and requesters' locations and activities upon delivery are taken into account when we are selecting the meeting point. So this quarter, I developed design and interface arguments relating to the minimization of inconvenience and disruption for users, mostly helpers, in on-the-go delivery systems. I then built a prototype that users could interact with as helpers and requesters, and ran the Mercury user study to test these arguments. So as I stated before, the core outcome for helpers in on-the-go systems is a reduction of inconvenience. If a helper feels too inconvenienced while participating in delivery, they'll be further disincentivized from using the system. Meeting point placement is crucial to this assurance of convenience. Incorrect or inefficient meeting point placement could cause inconvenience or disruption for either party in an active request. In order to alleviate this problem, helpers will be presented with information about a requester's ongoing and future locations and availabilities, and will manually select a meeting point that conforms to these criteria. This information takes the form of location radii, which are circles that the requester places around locations where they know that they will be available to pick up an order in upcoming hours. Each circle has a time frame associated with it, which allows the helper to know when the requester will be at each location. This gives them more flexibility in their selection of meeting points. Giving the ability for helpers to manually select a meeting point within these ranges makes it so that the point will never be more inconvenient than the helper would wish it to be, while also ensuring that the requester will never be too far away to reach the meeting point when a request is accepted. So a little bit about the interface model. So in the application, users are able to view all open requests nearby their location on this homepage. In order to ensure that the requests are not being accepted when not on the go, tasks from pickup locations that aren't nearby a potential helper are not shown. Users are also notified when they are near a pickup location with one or more open requests. Whenever a user places a request in the application, they're first going to specify a pickup location as well as the item they want delivered. They will then be brought to a map view where they can tap on the map in order to place any number of these location radii, and they can change the radius of how far they believe that they'll be able to go in order to pick up a request, and then add the time frame during which they'll be at each location. So on the helper side of the interface, when a potential helper views an order at a pickup location near them, they will be able to see all the radii that a requester has placed, as well as the time frames for each radius. They will then be able to select one of the radii and place the meeting point within the circle wherever they wish. They will then give the helper their ETA within the given time range, and to be able to add additional details in order to increase the specificity of the meeting point for the requester's benefit if they wish. While an order is in progress, the requester will get notifications whenever the request is accepted, the helper gets close to the meeting point, or the ETA of the helper's arrival changes. Both users are able to see each other's locations on a map view, as well as the selected meeting point. Requester and helper will also be able to contact each other if need be. Let's talk a little bit about the Mercury user study. So there were three main goals of this study. The first was to test my main design argument to determine why or why not the presentation of requesters' present and future locations and availabilities minimizes helpers' feelings of inconvenience and disruption while making deliveries. The second was mainly to think about future research and figuring out ways to improve the system by gaining an understanding of new obstacles that we hadn't considered or that we didn't consider important but users considered more important than we thought that occur in the last mile for helpers. The third goal, which was more minor when compared to the other two, but was still useful because some of our users were going to be acting as requesters in the study, was to determine the level of disruption that participation in the system caused to requesters, and why. So the study setup consisted of 8 Northwestern undergrads who ran the full system for 4 days. At the beginning of the study, it was highly suggested to them that they act as a helper in at least one request within the study period. As the researcher, sometimes I placed requests at particularly active locations in order to give potential helpers more opportunities to accept requests. Throughout the study, 6 requests in total were completed, 4 of which were entirely participant-driven with no researcher activity. So the measures for this study took 2 forms. The first was through an in-app survey that was completed by each user after each request was completed. So the study was implemented to act as a guideline for user interviews. For example, if a user put high inconvenience for a request, then it would be a reason to target them and ask them about why did you feel inconvenience during this, et cetera, et cetera. And the question, where are you headed next, was just to ensure that the deliveries were made on the go, and the waiting question was, again, just another thing to ask about in interviews. So for interviews, the questions that were asked fell under 4 general categories that were organized and designed in order to achieve the goals of the study. These 4 categories were general experience, helper interface and system interaction, identification of last mile pain points, and requester activity disruption. So a little bit about our key findings from the study. So one of the most important findings from the study was that the manual selection of the meeting point, coupled with the requester's presentation of present and future locations and availabilities, did reduce helper inconvenience, which matched what my design argument said. All the users who act as helpers praise these features very highly with regards to their convenience and how it specifically their ability to choose the meeting point within these radii reduced the inconvenience of these requests. And in the in-app survey, the average inconvenience for helpers and requests was a 1.3 out of 5, and the average disruption was a 1.6 repeating out of 5. So for requester disruption, in all cases except for one, where there was a problem with the ETA setting, the requesters always made it on time to the meeting points, and they never had to wait a long time for the requesters, for the helpers to arrive, rather. And in interviews, when asked about it, all of them said that it was a very easy and painless process as a requester. And every single requester for every request rated disruption and inconvenience as a 1 out of 5. So the key findings for last mile problems that came up during the study. So there were two major issues that came up. One, which was the more major one, dealt with coordination. So it was always convenient for helpers and requesters to make it to the meeting point on time, but there were some communication issues when it came to actually meeting each other at the meeting point. So many users didn't find the app intuitive with regards to communication or being able to understand how they would connect at the meeting point, even though they were both very near the meeting point. So many users made heavy use of outside texting in order to figure out exactly what it was to do. Another problem that two of our users faced was with accepting orders early. They felt that by accepting an order and waiting a bit before delivering it, they had a strong obligation to go through with their request, which put unnecessary stress and therefore inconvenience on themselves. So from this study, we learned that the presentation of present and future locations and activities is an effective mechanism to reduce both helper and requester inconvenience, but steps still need to be taken in order to ensure coordination between helper and requester is sufficiently facilitated. So the first step going forward will be to revise my design and interface arguments in order to incorporate the new information that was gained from the Mercury study. Then I will adjust the application accordingly and run a user study with a larger number of users. In the Mercury study, there was a small sample size, and many of the participants asked for small interface changes in order to make the app easier to use. And we'll obviously need to add in the new solutions that we come up for fixing the problem of coordination. And one other thing that could be done is to develop a smarter notification strategy. So even though it wasn't related to the goals of the study, several of the participants noted that they didn't tend to look at their phones while they were walking, so they frequently missed notifications about open requests. This could be something to look closer at in the future as it does decrease task acceptance. So like I said before, the main takeaway from this research is that the presentation of present and future requester locations and activities is an effective mechanism to reduce both helper and requester inconvenience. Coordination and miscommunication was also found to be a major factor standing in the way of true inconvenience and needs to be examined further next quarter. Thank you.